Hello, my name is Jackee Holder and I'm the host of the Interviews podcast, where slow conversations celebrate the power of the pen. In this episode, I'm so excited to interview Dal Kular, who is a creative facilitator, a writer, a mentor, and a maker. Now, when I say maker, I don't mean any maker. She is a journal keeper who goes beyond words in her journal. I have been watching and observing and enjoying Dal's work from afar, and it's always wonderful when you get to meet somebody that you admire and they turn out to just be so even better than you imagined they would be. She has quite a rich history of creative facilitation and making. Her master's was called Wildness, and it's a study into the therapeutic benefits of writing and making a zine about creativity, identity, and wildness. I love that. Just the title alone, I think, is a call to really engage with what Dal has to say. More recently, she was a feature of a brilliant short film which won a Best Film Award by the BMC Women UK called Love Notes to Nature. I loved watching that. I really enjoyed finding out more about her hometown of Sheffield and the gorgeous land that she inhabits and what it means to her, what it means to her family, how it connects her to her family. And in fact, she says she describes herself as writing and making art with her ancestors and her landcestors. I think you will really, really enjoy this conversation. You can follow her on Substack at a Wild Archive, where she writes delicious essays every week. You can also follow Dal on Instagram at Dal, D-A-L, Kular, K-U-L-A-R. That's Dal, D-A-L, and then K-U-L-A-R, all one word. I hope you enjoy this interview as much as I did. Good afternoon, everyone. I am delighted to be in the studio again, and I cannot contain my excitement because today we have an amazing guest with us. I have really worked hard to get her on the show. She's someone that I've been following for a while. I've admired her work from afar. This is probably the closest I have gotten to her by having her on the same virtual space with me, and I just delighted. So a warm welcome to Dalbinder Kaur Kular. Is that the right pronunciation
It
of your
is, yeah.
name? Oh, that's lovely. I'm really happy that I got that right. And welcome to Interviews, the podcast where slow conversations celebrate the power of the pen. And I couldn't have thought of a better person to have in the studio today, because so much of your work speaks to slowing down and savouring detail, and I can't wait for people who don't know your work to discover your work, because I feel that we need the spirit and the soul of your work in these times right now more than ever. And I'm really looking forward to us unpacking what your work is all about. So shall we start with you telling us a little bit, how do you describe yourself? You've got a wonderful website. You've got some words on there that I feel really capture the essence. But how would you describe yourself and how you show up in the world?
Well, thank you, first of all, Jackee, for having me on the podcast and for a very, very warm welcome. And all the love and appreciation back to you. as a long time admirer of your work. And also to say that years ago, way back in the early noughties, I read your book Soul Purpose, which left quite a profound impact on me at that time. And so yeah, to come full circle 25 years later and to be talking to you here is really special. So thank you. How would I describe myself? I always find that a really hard question. I'm a multidisciplinary creative practitioner. So I love writing, making and creating, using the mediums of word, text, image, stitch, zines, and other sorts of things. And I feel very much that my work is a collaboration with my ancestors and with land and nature, and yeah, is very much autoethnographic. I guess I'm creating, making, facilitating to understand myself better in the world, so I can share work that maybe other people will resonate and see and feel resonances with their own life. So creatively, how I show up in the world is through my journaling practice, is a huge part of that. Through my makings, I've been making ancestral scrolls and ancestral books as a way of connecting with grandparents and great-grandparents. And writing and facilitation is a huge part of my work as well, mainly with women of the global majority in the Sheffield area. Yeah.
I feel women in Sheffield are really lucky and blessed to have you, because your work is so deep and profound. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast, because we want to give a wider perspective on what journal writing is and how it can be a transformative practice. And I think that for me it's so important to be able to share how we can deepen our relationship with ourselves through the practice of journaling. And you've mentioned a few things here, and perhaps we can just dive in a bit more. So first of all, you mentioned the word autoethnographic, and not everyone will understand what that word means, but I think it's such an important word for us as women. Could you say a little bit more about that? And then I'd love to hear more about how your journal writing has transformed into the ancestral scrolls, because I know that's been a big part of shaping your own identity. And I can give you the questions again, because I know I've rolled two questions in one there.
Okay, so autoethnography, as I understand it, for myself, is studying myself, or aspects of myself, or questions that I have about myself, exploring them, investigating them, perhaps making experiments. So for example, in my master's thesis, my master's was in creative writing for therapeutic purposes. I was exploring zine making as the therapeutic potential of zine making. So I wrote an autoethnography. I was looking at myself, and then from exploring myself, I was looking at all the social, cultural, familial, environmental, transgenerational, social, educational, all those aspects, those bigger aspects. So I was exploring myself, but then making it bigger and wider to see how those aspects of life have impacted me and filtered into my being and who and how I was. So yeah, it's taking the individual and putting them in the context of the environment and the time and place and the systems and institutions they find themselves in. That's my understanding, and that's how I work autoethnographically, the personal into the political.
I love social. That. Yeah, the personal is political. We had somebody when I was at university in the 1980s. His name was Bob. I can't remember his second name, but he came into the Black Cultural Society that I was part of, and I'll never forget that. One of the things that he said to us: the personal is political. And as global majority women, what I really appreciate about your work is that you're very steeped in social justice, and you just mentioned here in terms of the ethnography of the work that you're looking at and looking at the self. You go into the social, the cultural, the familial, the environmental, so that it's like, it feels like it is such a, it's real, and it really involves the whole person. And I think that's really, really important. And you have different routes into accessing those parts of the whole person. I really like this idea of making experiments, because I think that's what you do really well. And so when I started reading your dissertation, Wild Ink, which I would really recommend people to search for and find, because at the beginning of it you say, this is not a boring read, and it is not a boring read. You are so provocative in it. It is so engaging. But, at the heart of it is this practice of making zines, or is it Zines or Zines?
I say zines.
Yeah. And I would love you to share a bit more about the zines making and what you discovered for yourself as you explored that in your dissertation.
Yeah, so I wish I had. I don't know where the little Wild Ink zine is at the moment. It was by my side for about 2 years after making it. That was a really, really incredible process. I gave myself 7 days to write and make a zine, exploring creativity, identity, and wildness. I wanted to know how I'd come to this stage of my life, which I would have been like my late 40s then, and got to this point where I was exploring my creativity. I was like exploring identity and also my connections to nature, and how come I'd veered so far away from that from my teenage years. And for many decades I was a social worker for 20 years, and I was still a social worker when I started the masters, actually, and I'm not anymore. So I wanted to explore that, and I used zine as my container to do that. And I when I was thinking about what to do my dissertation on, I literally woke up one morning, I thought, zines, I'm going to do it on zines. And then that's the route I went down, the portal I went down. And I found this wonderful, incredible lo-fi DIY technology, a kind of different language to express personal stories, a personal into the political. So I had this 7 days where I spent 3 days just doing a free write on creativity, identity, and wildness, just those titles, and I just riffed on them, and I ended up writing about 3,000 to 4,000 words. And then I had 4 days where I was constructing my narrative and constructing and making the zine. And from the I'm going into process here, Jackee, but it might be really interesting for people who are listening.
I think it is. Yeah.
From the 3,500 words, I then cut them up and rearranged them, and this is what became the kind of text and the narrative for the zines. And there were some pieces in that 3,500 words, like the poem "Dear Auntie Audre," that were complete pieces and just a little bit of editing. So I cut them up, rearranged them, and then I started getting images to put alongside them. And the images were really important. There's kind of like layers of meaning in this little zine that I was creating, kind of like a language and a narrative for what I was feeling inside my body, like a massive amount of emotions. When I look back on that zine, it's kind of, I describe it as a masala mix firework exploding into my life, because it surfaced so much. So I was working really intuitively, going with my gut feels, putting together this zine, physically cut, paste, glue stick, and then I printed it all out, put it on the mantelpiece to rest for 3 weeks, so an incubation period, went off and did something else, and then just like epiphanies were arising all the time. And when I went back to it, I think that there's two really huge things it unearthed for me: the impact of the partition of India and transgenerational trauma. So that came through the first few pages, when I have a map of the partition and the word wild written in Punjabi in red. to symbolise blood. And of course, I knew about the Partition of India, and I knew a bit about transgenerational trauma, but I hadn't really thought about that in my own life.
Yeah.
And then there was also the poem Dear Auntie Audre, where I listed all the ways in which I'd struggled with my mental health over decades. And that was a shock. It was like, oh, fuck. Really? There was the first time I'd written it all down.
Yeah.
And to link it, I mean, obviously that there was lots of things in that poem and lots of like reasons why, but also I couldn't deny the link to the partition and being a grandchild of the partition, as I call myself. Both my parents went through the Partition of India, and it was. I think it's a bit of a trope to say it was healing. It was healing. However, it was disturbing and troubling and illuminating and liberating, and there was a huge amount to unpack from creating that zine. And luckily I had the dissertation to help me work out what was happening here in the technology of making a zine and in doing cut up and writing and cut and paste and folds and just the colour on the pages, the layout, what was going on that had unearthed these narratives that enabled me to bring out stuff that I had not been able to do for decades.
Yeah.
I'd not really had much therapy, but I'd had some, but nothing had touched anything close to what I unearthed in this zine. And I just want to clarify, not every zine does that. Not, most zines don't. This was a particular piece of research and creation that was transformative. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question because I kind of go off on tangents.
You haven't gone off on a tangent at all, and I just feel like this is so much of why I wanted to have you on the podcast, because I knew that you would be able to articulate the depths that you're able to go to in that process. Because first of all, I know you said you had a little bit of therapy, but I don't think therapy on many levels would have been able to touch as deeply as you were able to go here through your creativity. And if you think about those three words that you described earlier on, you were looking at your identity, you were looking at your creativity, you're looking at your wildness. This gave you, I don't know if the container is a right word, but it gave you a place to really mine the intergenerational, the transgenerational trauma that was there, that sometimes words cannot penetrate it in the way like talking to another human being. But I think the process of the zine feels really important, and I really do feel there are elements of this process that could be very healing and transformative for women and men that listen into this podcast. And I think it's really unique what you did. So you free wrote for 4 days.
3 days.
Then, for 3 days. Then for 4 days you cut up and added words and started to create. Was that correct?
Yeah. Rearranging, creating the narrative. Yeah, working really intuitively with gut feels. And also, I just want to acknowledge that there was an ancestor. I don't know, I'd felt an ancestor knocking in my bones for a few years up to that point. And I knew it was somebody from my past. I created the zine, and after that was created, they went quiet. So I want to acknowledge that ancestor as being part of that process as well.
I just felt like I had to sit back in my chair. So in that process, so now more is being revealed. An ancestor was knocking on your bones, and they had been knocking for a while. And it's almost like once we sit up and we listen and we respond, that ancestor doesn't have to do that work anymore.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So much of what needed to have been healed, to have been repaired, to even to me, so much of this is about what's been witnessed, and it's almost like different channels open up.
Yeah.
So more can come through. And I think your nod to Audre is obviously Audre Lorde. the
Yeah.
writer, the poet, the activist, Zami. It's like, Audrey also had a part in this because she comes up a lot in your work.
Yeah.
You do a lot of speaking or a lot of writing, a lot of receiving from Audrey, from her quotes, from her
Yeah.
extracts from her books.
I think I was reading Sister Outsider at that time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I think that had just been published around that time. Well, republished by Silver
Yeah,
Press.
because it's been out
Um,
for a while. I definitely read
yeah,
that in my 1990s.
yeah. I really love the letter writing format and the dear addressing someone and responding. It's one of the most powerful prompts that I have, and it just enables me to access a means of response or speaking to. Um, so yeah, I think Auntie Audre really, yeah, she was important in that piece of work. And
Yeah,
in just, she asks, what tyrannies do you swallow on a day by day basis? And that was from there, I was just like, this is what I'm swallowing. And that kind of taking that as a prompt really enabled me or to create that poem. There's another
absolutely.
poem. Yeah, there's another poem called Ghost of We,
Yeah.
that's folded in. And that was after I read a poem by Amiri Baraka. Have I got his name right? I can't
I'm
remember.
not familiar with his work, but
I
oh
think I might be
yes,
saying
the
his name wrong.
activist. Yes,
And the poet.
yes, yes. I do
Yeah.
know who you're talking about.
And he had a poem, and The Ghost of We is after, I read that poem. So it inspired me to write The Ghost of We, which I'd written actually before. I'd written that poem maybe 6, 7 months before for another essay that I was doing for the masters, and that poem came out, and that was a profoundly healing poem. And I put that in, so I forgot to say that earlier. I put that into there because it was how at school I'd just really closed all my dreams down and my writing dreams, gone within myself. And really that poem was about, it startled me actually when I wrote it. It was just about coming out and just really owning my space.
Yeah.
um yeah.
So I want to acknowledge that. I mean, it feels like ancestrally some of the writers and the freedom fighters that have gone before us have really influenced your work. And you've made, I made when I was researching you, and it was just such a joy to read your work, from your Wild Archive Substack to your website, to the love notes to nature, which we'll talk about in a moment. It's just rich with drawing on so many of the ancestral connections. But also, I made a note that I've never seen someone use letter writing on such a profound level in their
Mm.
journaling. I did a session yesterday on grief coaching for coaches, and we talked about ancestors and we talked about rituals and ceremonies. But I said to them, when I worked on an on-demand coaching service for GPs after COVID for about 4 years, letter writing was the thing that I used all the time with GPs. They
Mm.
were writing letters to themselves, they were writing letters to the practice managers, they were writing letters to people in their surgeries. Do you know what I mean? And it it never fails to have such a powerful impact. But
Yeah.
what I've noticed in your work is it goes so much deeper.
Mm. Thank you.
It's like you're channeling the
Mm.
energy of those who have gone before us, and also channeling what's inside of you. And I also wanted to acknowledge that it feels like you're speaking to a woman who arrived in her 40s and begun to really excavate, unearth, that was a word you used earlier, unearth her authentic true self.
Mm.
And it's a reminder it's never too late.
It is never too late. Really, it isn't. If it's inside and you want to do it, go for it, honestly. Yeah.
But I
And I
think what
waited
you're
such
off,
a long time. Sorry, Jackee.
but it was worth the wait.
It was
It
definitely
was
worth the
worth,
wait.
because I feel like sometimes life does life, so we can incubate stuff. Things can ferment inside of us. They can grow. They can have strong roots. And it's when it's time, it's time. There was
Yeah.
no hurry with this. You feel like
Mm,
you're in right time. And I think that's an important message, particularly for women, that we remember that right time is right time.
yes.
I've been
Yeah.
dreaming of doing a podcast for years. I listen to so many podcasts myself. I devour podcasts. It's taken me years to get here, but it just feels right now.
Mm, yeah.
So we can really trust that. So I love this. We've got this amazing enriching process of how the zines really helped you make those transgenerational connections and actually do some healing.
Mm,
I remember you wrote about, and I learned more about what was actually happening through the partition in 1947
mm,
in India, particularly the violence, the sexual violence against
mm,
women. And
yes.
we do carry that down the generations. We can't
Mm,
escape that.
mm,
I've spent the last 2 years doing a lot of family constellations work,
mm,
trying to heal pockets and elements of that transgenerational trauma. And I
yeah.
feel like you're offering us and you use this in your dissertation. You talk about recipes and, you know,
Yeah.
uh, making masalas. Is it? Am I?
There was a masala mix. Oh, yeah, I
That's
think
right.
maybe in the poem at the beginning. Yeah, you
Yes, you
use the
do.
word container. I use the word cooking pot. I like the
That's
idea
right.
of cooking
That's
pot.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. In
Mm,
fact, I'm going to be really specific here because I love your words. You say zines are a bit like a cooking pot. They
oh.
can be holding space for the many complementary and contradictory ingredients and experiences of our lives, with the potential for stirring up some fresh and surprising flavours, challenging narrative expectations, and disrupting assumptions both within ourselves and others.
Mm. Yeah, it's good to hear that back. It sounds good.
Well, do you know, I
Yeah,
feel like it's
yeah,
important for us to do that for each other,
yeah,
because I think sometimes we
yeah.
lay the words down and we
Mm,
walk away and we don't realise what we've laid down.
yeah, yeah.
For
That's
me,
so true. Uh,
absolutely. Go ahead.
well, yeah, it's really important for me to hear that back because I think zines were really popular technology now to work with. Um, and I think in some ways, because they are small handmade magazines, I don't have one just on me at the moment, they can sometimes be dismissed because they're very personal, they're small run. Um, it's easy for people to just like say, oh, it's just, it's a small thing, it's not really important. It's not some big published, it's not been published by somebody else, it hasn't got that kind of prestige. Yet zines are, when I visited Zine Fest as part of my research, over and over again, and particularly I was going to speak to women, the transformative power of making zines, of getting their stories down on paper, of putting them in this, like making this artifact. They're making an archive. It's something that lasts and something that can be shared, and other people can get something from them. And it's outside of the publishing gaze, it's outside of the corporate gaze. We have total ownership of that. We can write what we want, we edit ourselves. We can be raw and wild and unruly, or as edited as we want to be. We get to own what we share, with who we want to share, and also the community that comes through making zines. I know you've been on Cherie Mack's podcast. She's my zine sister. I met Cherie through zines, and we've built a community around that. So I do think zines are an incredibly and can be an incredibly profound technology, as well as fun and frivolous and playful and joyful. They can also really help us access those layers that we can struggle to access just through like mainstream kind of therapeutics or writing, and not to dismiss those are important. I think there's just something magical and alchemical about mindfully, or maybe not even, just like intuitively created zines.
To be fair, Dal, I think most books don't get written with that kind of energy.
Mm,
You know, when you describe the process of being raw and wild, most
mm,
books are quite tamed.
yeah.
You know, I was trying to get my proposal through to a publisher for my book on trees. I have quite a long history with different trees, and it just
Yeah.
keeps growing. It's like a forest. It started off as a single tree, then it became a bit of a woods, and now it feels like a bit of a more of a forest.
Mm,
And when I was putting my proposal together, my agent at the time, you know, I just realised that I was trying to fit it into a formula that the
mm,
publishers felt could sell. And
yeah.
I just didn't feel like I was being myself in the book. Like when
Mm,
you use words like wild and raw, and you've got a lovely description in your dissertation about what the word wild means for you without that
mm,
colonial capitalist gaze on
yeah.
it. And I think this is the thing about zines. This is a place where women can really be authors of their own work, of their
Yeah.
own stories. And
Mm,
I really, you know, I was looked at the date of, you've got a workshop coming up in August. I think I'm away. I'm out of the
mm,
country on that day, but I really either want to get to a workshop, and I want to encourage other women, particularly women, because we often, you know, we don't always give ourselves permission to share our stories, to
mm,
write our memoirs, you know. And I
yeah.
feel like you that's a sacred space, that it could be done in a
Yeah.
way where you have full authorship.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
they're really, really beautiful.
Mm,
Well, you know, as we're so one of the things that I've taken away about your work is, and I could see myself in this. You're, well, no, I aspire to be like this. You're multimedia. Your
mm,
work is layered, it's textured. I love that juxtaposition between the words, material,
mm,
collaging. Do you know what I mean? It's very visceral.
mm.
Um, and you're doing a lot more around stitching.
Yeah.
And then there was you did that, and this is where maybe the ancestral scrolls come in, and I think
Yes.
they're a very important and valuable element of your work.
Mm.
So when you did the dear great grandfather, you did an ancestral scroll for him, I think it was,
It was
or
the
was it a
book for
zine?
the, yeah, so the books downstairs, the my great grandfather,
Mm-hmm.
that was a book. And
Mm-hmm.
do you want to know the story behind that briefly?
I'd love the listeners to hear that story.
Yeah. So about a year ago, my both my parents have passed away now, and I didn't really know anything about. I didn't grow up with my grandparents here; they were over in India, and I didn't really know anything about my great grandparents. And a year ago, I got summoned to Birmingham. My 91-year-old uncle
Mm-hmm.
didn't have long to live. He's had a miraculous recovery and still around and stronger than ever. That he just, and he wasn't well, but it just came out of him about my great grandfather's name, and that he'd fought all 4 years in World War I, and he'd come back home. He managed to make it home, and but he didn't survive to see any of his grandchildren. So his name is Sham Singh Kalar, my paternal great grandfather, and I was just struck by this. Like, I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh my gosh, I know my paternal great grandfather's name. He was in all 4 years of that horrific war. And
Yeah.
yeah, anyway, a couple of days later, I went to a secondhand bookshop down the road, and a pile of books like fell off the top shelf. Luckily didn't hit my head, but one fell right at my feet, and it was a 1930s tour guide or guidebook to World War One sites in Europe. And I thought, oh, okay, this is really strange. So I bought the book, and I knew at that point that I was going to deconstruct this book, and I was going to write a letter. So again, the letter writing format, but in a visual form. I was going to write a letter to my great-grandfather to let him know that, you know, we're here and we survived because he survived. And obviously my great-grandmother, whose name, unfortunately, I don't know. So that's how that book came about. And there are some words in it. It's mainly images of, I found World War One Sikh soldiers, and the images that kind of I felt and resonated, I put them into the book to create this narrative, and this letter to my paternal great-grandfather. So that was the book. And then the scrolls, which I do have here. So this was the first, this is my my great.
Oh, it's such a shame we can't see it. The screen is not great. But again, oh yeah, this one I see a lot. I think this is on your website. That's your mum, isn't it? That we just seen
That's my
that.
mother. Yeah. So this that's me when I was little.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'd been feeling, actually this is a good spooky story. It's good spook. I'd felt more connected to my paternal grandmother throughout my whole life, and not felt very connected to my maternal grandmother. But I could start to feel like, oh, I'm wanting to connect with her. Who was she? I need to know more about her. And I just felt this pull. And so I started to try writing about her and my connection, and the words just wouldn't come. So I don't know where I got it from. I must have seen something, I don't know, snippet scrolls or something that you see on YouTube. And I thought, and also I'm just thinking, actually, I'm just looking at a scroll somebody made me. My friend Carol in Wales had made me this scroll with some words from the Wild Service essay. So maybe that's where it'd been in my consciousness. So I just started, I thought I'll make a scroll and I'll use the language of Stitch to see if I can connect, if I can like interpret what's going on in my mind and my body, if I could find this point of connection with my grandmother. Kaur is her name. And interestingly, the year before I was part of Dig Where You Stand Archival Justice Project. And that's a groundbreaking, amazing project to unearth Black and Brown people in Sheffield, particularly before the Second World War. And going, you know, at the Black and Brown history of Sheffield, going back hundreds of years, like hundreds. And I was one of the selected artists, and I was looking at the Sikh presence in Sheffield before World War II. And I found the name of one woman in the 1939 register, which was taken just as the war broke out, and they needed a register for ration cards, who just lived a mile and a half down the road, and her name was Kaur. And I wrote 2 poems, and I was going Butchin, your name, a ghost on my tongue, and things like that, and repeating it. And I actually wrote a poem that was a letter to Butchin and a letter back from her. And I didn't know my grandmother's name at that point. But a year later, when I made this and I knew my grandmother's name, it's crazy that I don't know my grandmother's name. I should have. But she's called Butchin, and Gur, G-U-R, is the prefix to Butchin. So, yeah, and it was interesting because Gur means instruction or something like that. And in the poems I'd put your name, it means precious word, instruction. What are you trying to tell me? Wow. So I just feel like following those kind of like, this is, I think, really important for the creative process and journaling, just following those breadcrumbs, those hunches. And half the time I just think, well, what the hell am I doing? I don't know where my work's leading or going. Like, what am I doing? But there's, you know, I can map it back, and I just think, yeah, my grandmother was definitely calling me in, and this was my way of communicating with her, and part of me thinks she didn't. I'm assuming she didn't speak English, and my Punjabi is very poor, so our common language is Stitch. Yeah,
That's a powerful kind of pulling that
yeah,
together. Your common language is Stitch.
yeah.
And personally, I don't find the story spooky. I feel like you are reminding us of what
Mm.
happens when we do follow those breadcrumbs and we trust
Yeah.
those hunches. And it's such and this is what we wanted for the podcast, is a reminder of what we can manifest when we commit to our journaling and our creative practice, because I really feel you are honoring the creative practice
Mm.
as a therapeutic practice. And you don't, it's so telling that you don't have to know the actual names of your ancestors to connect to them.
Mm.
You didn't know what was going to come through you, but
No.
you were open to it.
Mm.
And it reminds me, one year my mum and dad went back to Barbados in 1999, and so mum would come over sometimes, obviously because all of her children are still here, and she was sitting on my sofa years ago, and I can't remember what I shouted out from the kitchen at the time, something about my grandfather. And then she let me know that my grandfather worked on the Panama Canal. Hello, didn't know that he even left the island of Barbados. And now you're telling me he worked on the Panama Canal.
Yeah.
And so I've had all these thoughts around, what was my grandfather's experience like in Panama?
Mm.
Do we have any family in Panama? And as
Mm.
most Caribbean people tend to do, out came another revelation. Oh, and he won the lottery when he was out there. Hello? No one's
Wow.
ever mentioned this to anybody. And then I got the whole story was unearthed that he'd built a big house. He'd married someone else before my maternal grandmother.
Mm.
She liked nice things. They spent a lot of money. And he had a horse and a buggy at the time, one of the only global majority people that looked like him, with that kind of, having a horse and buggy before cars were around. So, these stories are there, aren't they? And,
Mm.
it's really interesting to know how our writing practice, our creative practice can put us in touch with the stories that
Mm.
have not been handed down. Luckily, I
Yeah.
got that from my mother, but, part of me also has to explore more of that story for myself.
Yeah. Yeah, we get snippets, don't we? And we
We
have
get
to piece
snippets.
them together. Yeah.
They're like fragments, aren't
Mm.
they? And I think you
Mm.
use that, you're taking those fragments and you're stitching things together. And, when I
Mm.
was researching, I said that it feels like there's a rich intersection in your work between craft and words in your journal writing practice. And that I could really, like, I guess the inquiry for me was, how does stitching speak to you in a way that perhaps words don't sometimes? And I was particularly thinking, remember, you haven't spoken about this, but you had a brain injury or head injury,
Mm.
and it's impacted some of your mobility.
Not mobility. Well, it did actually at the time, because I had it's called vestibular ocular reflex. It's like something in
Yeah,
your brain governs balance. So that was impacted, and yeah. But now I'm fine. Yeah.
but how was stitching allowed you to? It's a bit like you use that word folding
Ah,
earlier
right.
as you were talking about your
Yeah.
thesis.
Yeah. So with the brain injury, it definitely had an impact on my ability to write. It was more about, I actually wrote the Wild Service essay 6 months after the brain injury, and it felt painful to write it. I mean, that was
Okay.
dragged. I say it was dragged out. I don't know how I wrote it. A lot of it just came through, but it was because my brain was so injured, I had post-concussion syndrome. It was really difficult to write. And so journaling, I was journaling a lot. The journaling didn't stop, but actually like making pieces of writing that were going to go out there into the world and be publishable was incredibly hard.
Okay.
So I think actually that's when I started increasing my mixed media work, and and I think the stitching evolved from that. And the stitching, I think, has only been around for the past year and a half, just finding another language, another way. And maybe that was tied to the brain injury when I couldn't find the words to write about my grandmother, or my great grandfather. I mean, if any of the scrolls I've used stitch instead of, I mean, there are some words on the stitching, but I've used stitch as the primary and fabrics and layers as the primary kinds of methodology. And I think that was related to my brain injury. I was tired. It was hard work to think. My reading, like I was reading perhaps 2, 3, 4 books a month before the brain injury, and afterwards, I think last year 2 or 3. My reading's come back now. It's been the brain injury was in summer 2022, at the height of my writing when I was like really going for it. So journaling has definitely, visual journaling. Yeah, I veered more towards visual journaling after the head injury. Mixed media journaling was profoundly healing. It was still keeping me in touch with the pen, keeping me in touch with the word, and with that creative flow. It's just a different form to then just using words. So I guess in one sense, I mean, I didn't really realise that I was creative in this way, of scrolls and these artist books another way, until I had the brain injury, until the brain injury forced me to think I needed to do something. I needed to create. And this was easy. And for a good while after my brain injury, and I was still going to work, I was still functioning at a level, but sequencing and things like that was really hard, and cohering ideas and thoughts. So what a journal allowed me to do was, well, again, that being free, and one, it doesn't matter. Nobody's going to see it. And actually, I kind of stitch like I journal. I'm just stitch where I want to go, and I don't plan it out other than choosing the photos. I have the idea, I choose the photos and choose the fabrics. I'm doing a sibling one at the moment. I'll just like choose the bits of fabric, and then I'll just start working on the panels, just really intuitively. And it's a bit like the zine, I guess, like journaling. Stuff comes to the surface as you're doing something else, as I'm stitching, using, somebody described it, Rosalind Wyatt, I think was her name, writing with a needle.
Lovely.
So colours, layers, symbols, they're all forms of writing. It's using a stitchy language, a different language.
I think that's a term we need to adopt, stitchy language. And I think that's, again, I feel like you give us such range of how we can journal.
So some people actually do stitched journals. They create a book that is made out of fabric, and they'll stitch into it every day, and use that as their, words or images, use that as their method of journaling.
Yeah. There's an artist that I'm following on Instagram who she stitches onto, like the sacks that used to hold the flour and the sugar in. I can't
with the
remember
red
her
lettering.
name. With the red lettering,
Yeah, amazing. They're stunning. Yeah.
So I can see, and I like the fact that even though you had this injury, the journaling didn't stop. But it's interesting to know that where the bits of the writing that requires the sort of more cognitive sort of left brain to structure the writing, that was harder for you. But the journaling was like this kind of, this river that was just kept, it just kept on going. It kept on giving to the page. And I think that's quite important to to distinguish, really.
And also just from like, a neurophysiological sense, it was, I think, a way to just keep like building those neurons, the
Yeah,
neuroplasticity, keeping the brain going. Like the, it would have been so easy to have not done any of that.
yeah,
And I actually, like last year, I didn't do loads of journaling. I'm really back on it full force at the moment, and I could feel for many reasons. There was a lot of things happening last year. Um, that just meant I didn't go to my book. I was doing my stitching and stuff, but I didn't go to the journal as much. I can really feel the shift coming back to journaling, just the shift of what's happening in my brain, in my imagination, in how I think. So I do think if people like, want the hard science, I can't give hard science, but if I was thinking of myself as an experiment, I had a brain injury, how I wrote before and how I wrote afterwards, and how journaling was a really important part of my recovery, and creativity was. Um, yeah, I can see how it was kind of keeping me exercising, getting some
yeah,
blood to that area.
yeah.
Well, the whole brain got shook, so it's, yeah.
It
Mm,
makes me think that for example, in every hospital, every patient could probably be given a journal and some
mm,
coloured pens and some stitching.
yeah.
I walk in and I just see people sort of languishing, and
Yeah.
I feel there's something really important here that you shared around what keeps the spirit and the
Mm,
heart of who we are alive. And I
mm,
do feel like, for me, I do feel like journaling has been a lifeline.
mm.
Sometimes when I go back into my journals, I've got over 100 journals that I've filled
Wow.
over my time of journaling, mainly with writing, pasting in images, quotes. Um, but I'm always pleasantly surprised at remembering who I am beyond
Mm,
how I show up in the everyday.
yeah.
And you've really invigorated me today, and I hope the
Mm,
listeners, listening in, will also feel inspired to just do more with their journals and how they
yeah.
express themselves
Mm.
creatively.
Do you use the
There's
same kind of oh, sorry, Jackie.
no. Do I use the same kind of
Do you
journals? You
do you
say
use the same kind of journal throughout your practice, or do you shift and change and get different books and
different books all the time.
mm,
Sometimes they're large, sometimes they're small. I was just looking to see if I had my journals over the current ones over there in my bag, but the one before that was that size. The one
oh,
that's this size, I use all different
yeah,
kinds. When I go on holiday to Barbados, I try and take a small one because I'm always walking around. My bag's always quite heavy because I've got a
yeah.
couple of books in there. I have what I call personal journal, which
Mm-hmm.
is just really very sort of emotional. How
Mm,
feelings and what I'm going through, things I want to create. And then I have what I call my common purpose book. That's where I write
mm,
down, ideas, the grief journaling. Sorry, the grief journaling course I did yesterday. That you will find that way weeks before in my common purpose book, which was commonly known as a
mm.
Commonplace book, where you
Yeah.
wrote down things that you were noticing around you, things that were of interest to you. You'll find notes about that in that
Mm,
common purpose book, and then I'll pull those into my slides. It will help me shape my
yeah.
content and what I share.
It's your cooking pot.
It's my cooking pot. There you go. It's my cooking pot. And actually, when I did train as a counsellor stroke therapist for 3 years with I did 3 or 4 years with psychosynthesis. And I haven't thrown away my notebooks from those, from my training. And every other page I drew trees with thousands and thousands of leaves on for three
Wow.
years. As I sat
Wow.
listening to the lectures, it was a tough course to do. There's a lot around race that was very, very challenging. I was the only identifiable person of global majority person on that 3-4 year training, and they had a lot to address around race, both from my peers on the course to my tutors and lecturers. It was bad. It was not great.
I can imagine.
And the trees and the doodling kept me going. You know, and I got very intricate about the leaves. And some of them are massive. They spread across pages, and then I used to write my notes around that.
Oh my gosh, that sounds incredible. And really holding.
I think it was. I think it was. The trees were really holding to me, you know. So yeah, that was really important. Our time is very quickly coming to a close, and you know, this is why we say there's slow conversations celebrating the power of the pen. And lately I keep asking myself, do I need to say the power of the hand as well, because that feels to be coming up with all of the conversations that I've had so far. But Dal, we cannot finish this conversation without talking about nature and your love of, we can't. It will be a disservice to our listeners. And first of all, I want to say congratulations on Love Notes to Nature, which won the BMC Women in Adventure 2026 winner of the Best Film Award. Yeah!
Honestly, that's so funny. It just makes me laugh. Like, I just was going around my allotment in a batwing top. And it was up against films of women running across the Alps and stuff, but that's the film that touched the judges. So shout out to Joanna Szuchomska, who was the filmmaker, who's an incredible Polish filmmaker based in London now, actually. Incredible woman, incredible. Yeah, it was made in a day.
It was made in a day, the film, but it was in the making for how long?
Yeah. Hundreds of years.
Hundreds of years. You could feel that. It was a very intimate portrayal of you on the allotment, you in your notebooks, and then you on the land, wasn't it? Where was it? The place in Sheffield. Tell us more about Love Notes to Nature.
So Love Notes to Nature is a little 4-minute film made by Joanna Szuchomska. Made in a day, edited in a day. It's part of Sheffield Doc Fest last year. And we were exploring relationship to land, to memory, to ancestors, and through my allotment, and through gentle things, really. And Stanage Edge, which has been a very important place in my life for like over 40 years. It's this 3.5 mile gritstone escarpment in the Peak District. It's really busy now, but for many, many years it was really quiet and deserted. And it's a place where I've walked so much, and I really felt like my ancestors in the Punjab, they were walkers. They had buffalo and cart. That they walked. They did a lot of walking between temples. There was the walking during the partition, and walking on Stanage Edge so often made me feel like I was walking the freedoms of my ancestors, but here in the UK on Stanage. Well, wherever I go walking, really, but I'm really mindful that the ability and my freedom to walk and to go out is something hard earned, and things that my people had to survive in order for me to be able to do this. And also just that connection with walking somewhere, the same place so often, getting to know the creatures, getting to know the gritstone, the shapes of the rocks, the sky, the view, the weather, the wind. And that being a reciprocal relationship, because all those elements, our like kind of wild kin, were getting to know me. So it felt like a really, it feels like a really profound relationship, which I have found, a way to to put that into words and language. And so some of the excerpts from my writing were in that film, and also the allotment as well. I've got a little ancestor orchard, 3 trees. I buried a big. I wrote 110,000 words, rough draft of what I called a memoir about my mum, and I just couldn't get further with it. It was at the time of the brain injury. I'd finished it just before, and so I buried it on the allotment. So it's like, you know, land is this really transformative, incredible, precious. It's what we live on and live off. Everything comes from the land. So that's what that film was saying. And there was the question, if women made maps. So I was questioning borders and boundaries, and why we build them, who we want to keep out, and you know what the borders of national parks, these borders that are made to protect, are also borders of privilege, and who they keep out, and who gets access and who doesn't get access. So I was thinking of like pulling, you know, boundaries down, and then asked the question, what if women made maps? You know, women have made maps. Women have been map makers. They don't look like flat pieces of paper. You know, they might look like dream lines or song lines. Animals have made maps with their desire lines. Maps woven into the hair of African women. And so our maps would look very different, the maps we have in our bodies, and how can we kind of like bring that to the surface and translate it somehow, whether that's through words, painting, languages, walking, you know.
I made a note to myself, and I wrote it into my journal, that I kept returning to the question that you've just shared there. What if women made maps and removed boundaries and borders? What if we blurred all the boundaries and designated land a national park? I said after this, I find prompts like this transformative, both in the asking and in the answering. Even the asking of it was like, when I read those words or heard, I kept rewinding the film to write this down, you know what I mean? Because on YouTube there's no transcripts. I'm like, oh my God, rewind it, because it just literally landed on me. And I was like, I need to ask this question of myself. And then I think your essay in Wild Service is wonderful. And if you don't mind, I'd just like to read this short clip, because it really helped me think about as well. I live in London. Well, I live on the edge of London, but I walk all over London. I love walking. And, you know, I'm a real champion of using nature and connecting with nature in urban spaces. But what I like about you is how you go out and you inhabit the land around you. So in the Wild Service essay, you're talking about your time on Geometra, is it?
Gometra.
Geometra.
I think it's Gometra, how it's pronounced,
Gometra, And you write, this is how I feel when I'm leaning my naked self against a slab of rock on Gometra, a tiny Hebridean, I'm not pronouncing that correctly, island, being wave splashed over and over again. The city, the colonizations, the microaggressions, the shoulds, the partitions are washed away, disappeared for a while. This is a practice of erosion, eroding the layers and the forcings of what a racist, misogynistic and capitalist society wants me to be. These are practices of erosion I've used over decades, disappearing and dissolving that which does not belong to me. I'm not sure I knew what I was doing back then. Now I know this is healing.
Yeah. I was back there on that rock when you were reading that. Thank you for reading that.
You took me back there with you. you know, and it felt like a reminder for all of us to just remember where are those places that give us that feeling.
Yeah.
You know,
And they could be local, they could be really close by. We
absolutely.
don't have to go far. I mean, I'm a huge lover of the Hebrides, Inner and Outer Hebrides, but that can happen in your back garden or
Absolutely.
like a
I
park somewhere. Well, maybe not
when I,
naked. Well, maybe naked in your back garden, but not in the park.
not in, maybe not in the park. So the place I go to in London when I want to have that sense of being out in the wild is Richmond Park.
Hmm.
It's an amazing park because it's untouched really. It's not
Mm.
manicured, and there are
Yeah.
lots of spaces where you can feel like you're just there by yourself, but it feels relatively safe enough as well. So I
Mm.
just go in there, breathe the air walking in there. The only challenge with Richmond Park, you have to go off the beaten track because the cars do drive through there still, but it's one of the royal parks and it's untouched. You know, I
Mm.
could easily do another hour with you, and maybe we will do a part two in season two because I feel like there's even more we could be talking with you about. But, you know, this has been such a rich, transformative conversation, and I really know that our listeners, will get a lot from our conversation today. But before we go, we ask every guest to leave us with a journaling prompt, and I'm really curious about what prompt would you like to leave us with today and why.
Yeah, so I'm going to leave people with Dear Nature, I feel dot dot dot, and write a letter. Oh, you could say Dear Earth, whatever word feels meaningful for you. Dear Land, um, Dear Back Garden, something to do with land, nature. Dear Oak Tree, Dear Richmond Park,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe, oh no, I'm adding an extra prompt, Jackee. I can't see, I
Go
can't
on,
help
go
you.
for it, go for it.
Maybe when you've done that, and if the feeling comes, maybe dear Jackee, dear Dal, and that being, that space, that land, maybe they want to write to you and see if something comes back from them.
That's a wonderful prompt. So
Mm.
you've given us so many different ways to start our letter, whether that's to dear land, dear earth. I often write to dear Mother Earth,
Mm.
dear back garden, getting really granular, dear oak tree, dear plane tree. But I love this idea of being able to respond back. So, what would
Mm.
the earth, what would the oak tree, what would Richmond Park want to say back to dear Jackee, or to dear
Mm.
Dal, or to dear Jennifer, or to dear Yvonne? So, that feels like a wonderful prompt for
Mm.
our listeners and viewers to take away from today's extraordinary conversation with the amazing Dalbinder. Please, we will link up all the details to where people can find you, from your website to the Wild Service, which is it's so. Every time I go onto it, I've got two Substack accounts, by the way, so I never know which one to log on to access the account. But whenever I land there, I'm there for ages, just reading and taking in. It's a wonderful Substack, and it's still free, which I find amazing because it's
Mm.
hard to find wonderful writers like yourself who are still sharing their Substack for free. So thank
Mm.
you for that gift to us,
Mm.
and I'm sure you'll get lots of people looking for your work. And yeah, I look forward to having you again. Thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much, Jackee. I've absolutely loved being here with you, and I love your work and I love your questions. They're just such beautiful questions. So it's been it's been a really beautiful experience just to be able to talk about work and chat with you and converse with you about creativity and journaling. Yeah, thank you.
Lovely. Thank you. Go well, Dal. Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dal as much as I did. After the conversation, I sat for a few minutes contemplating where we went to in the conversation. I gave some thought to my ancestors, and I remembered I can't really call it, maybe it was a collage that I made of some photographs of my dad that are stuck onto a sheet of material that I made in a visual medicine class many, many years ago. My dad died in 2006 in a visual medicine class with Suzette Clough. And my conversation with Dal reminded me that there are so many different ways to journal, that we don't always journal with writing. And when I think about that cloth, I think I'm going to pull it out and I want to do something with it. Dal has inspired me, the way that she has used her journals to be in conversation with her ancestors who are no longer with us, really deeply touched me and moved me. The way she was able to channel the stories and the memories of her ancestors and bring those to life, bring to life that which was not known to her consciousness, but clearly lived in her subconscious. She said so many gems, and one of the things I remember that she said, I believe everyone is inherently and divinely creative, that everyone has the right to write and make their hearts out. And this stuff is in our bones, it's inherited from our ancestors, and it is wanting to be expressed through us. And I think she really reminded us that beyond the life of the mundane, those ordinary moments, we can literally stop and pause and choose to be and do something different. There are also some surprises in this conversation. You can't make this up. I had no idea that my first book, Soul Purpose, I think I've got it here. Let's see if I've got it here. Oh, here it is. There's a copy of Soul Purpose. See if I can get it off the shelf without these books falling on my head. Well done. Well, my first book, Soul Purpose. This book had a profound effect on Dal. I wrote this book, it was published in 1999, 27 years ago. And, you know, who would have known that I would have got to do an interview with somebody who was inspired, motivated, touched, encouraged by this book, which I wrote when I was in my 30s. So that was really lovely. And Dal described this as us coming full circle. 25 years later, it just felt like a really, really special moment. It was really clear that there is a very deep and profound social and political agenda. Doesn't feel like the right word, because I think it is more than an agenda. It is an embodiment of who Dal is, what she stands for, and that is really replicated in her creativity and her journaling. And I love that she talked about writers who have inspired her. She calls Audre Lorde Auntie Audre, and describes how she spoke to her during her writing. She used her book Sister Outsider and did a lot of letter writing to Auntie Audre. I think I'm going to take that. I have a lot of writing mentors, but I want to make that a much more significant practice. And I'm really encouraged by how she has normalized and incentivized making zines. And she describes zines, you know, those fold out sort of like comic books. They're tiny, but they fold out, got all these different segments to them. She describes zines like cooking pots, like there's always something cooking in there. I really, really like that. And I think that's a really good prompt to to kind of work on in the future. And we connected around the Panama Canal, and I told the story of my grandfather working on the Panama Canal. So there was lots of lovely connections, and she's left you with a prompt, and it was a very simple prompt but profound prompt, which is writing a letter. You could write a letter to your higher power. You could write a letter to your green space. In my case, it would have been Richmond Park. And she encourages us to start the letter, dear higher power, dear Buddha, dear Richmond Park if it's a green space, dear on the park, as in Richmond Park, just do a bit of letter writing. And I think that's a really lovely practice, and it's a practice that I have used in my professional capacity as a leadership coach with so many leaders in a whole range of different formats and different reasons. But I really like that this is one that Dal has left us with. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Do go on to our various platforms where you have listened to this podcast. Please leave us a testimonial or some comments. We really appreciate it. We are a new podcast, and we are looking to increase our reach and get more people to come here and listen to these conversations. If I enjoy them, I really hope that you will enjoy them. Look forward to seeing you at the next Interviews podcast, where slow conversations celebrate the power of the pen.